Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, March 19th, 2015. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, homebrewer Ryan Leamy talks to us from the land of maple, Vermont. Ryan gives us some background on how sap turns into syrup, which kinds are best for our purposes, and tips on using maple in maple wine and different styles of beer. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can find me on Twitter. I'm Basic Brewing, all one word. We have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing video page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. We're on the Google Plus as well. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. You know how it works. Whenever you think of Amazon shopping, go to our website first, basicbrewing.com. Click on the Amazon link on the right-hand side of the page. That'll take you back to Amazon, or to Amazon for the first time. You shop there as you normally do. Won't cost you any extra, but you'll be helping us to bring you this show, and we greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site as well that work in a similar fashion. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes, our Android app on Amazon.com. We have a Windows Phone app. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, and we're on the Stitcher app as well. If you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support. Thanks to everybody who has done so already. And you'll get a link to the free bonus video that Steve and I made at the beginning of the year, cooking up some cabbage rolls and using some homebrew in those. Let's take a very quick look into the mailbag. Kenny writes from Texas. Kenny has been watching our video podcasts, and he says, I have a question concerning the Smash Speed Brew IPA that Steve brewed last month. I think it was actually previous to last month. But anyway, since it is a smaller batch, 1 gallon versus 5, is the fermenting process shorter? I pitched yeast on my 1 gallon last Friday, and the yeast has been working like crazy until late yesterday. That's only about 3 days, which seems a little quick to me. However, I've never done this small batch brewing before. The temperature has been around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Should I get this bottled, or should I let it sit a while longer? I'm a newbie to home brewing, so any help is appreciated. Keep up the good work and tell Steve that he is worth the price of admission. Well, thanks, Kenny. I agree, especially since our podcasts are free. Just a little joke there. Welcome to the hobby, by the way, Kenny. I've gotten this question a few times recently. Small batches are going to ferment at about the same rate as their bigger cousins, especially if you pitch the yeast proportionally to what you would pitch for a bigger batch. However, if you, say, pitch a whole packet of yeast that's designed for a 5-gallon batch into a 1-gallon batch, it's going to get started fermenting more quickly because it won't need to build up cells for fermentation. At least that's the way I understand it. So in that case, you might have a shorter fermentation phase. But my general rule for a pale ale is to let the beer live in the primary fermenter for around 10 days to 2 weeks and then bottle, provided that you've reached the final gravity that you're looking for. Okay, let's move on to the meat of the matter. We've talked about brewing with maple a couple of times on the show before, but I think we basically were only scratching the surface. So I asked homebrewer Ryan Leamy if he could help us dig a little deeper. Ryan Leamy, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being on.
We're going to talk about maple sap and maple syrup and maple trees and everything maple. You're up there in maple country, right?
Yeah. I'm about 45 minutes from the Quebec border in northern Vermont. So mapling is pretty big here. It's a big pastime as well as a big moneymaker for a lot of our farmers.
Now, are you or any of your family members, do you have a heritage of maple making?
I do. My father's side is all from Vermont, and I know that they have. And then we have a lot of friends who do it as well. It's you can't throw a stone in Vermont without hitting someone making maple syrup. So.
Well, you shouldn't ought to be doing that anyway.
Yeah.
Well, now we've talked about maple a couple of times on this show in the past. One, the episode from February 19th of 2009 with Jen and Casey and Andy and I using maple sap to brew a beer, maple sap, and then later on maple syrup in the boil to brew up a tasty beer. Mm-hmm. And I went back and listened to that episode, and I also listened to the episode from this past year, May 20th, 2014, with Andrew Parr, who made a maple wine with 6 different yeasts and sent those, and Steve and I shared those on the show. And that was the first time that we had ever really had any exposure to maple wine. But we're going to talk, but you and I are going to talk about that because I have a feeling you're a lot more familiar with that than we were.
Yeah, that was actually the reason we got in contact first was, I didn't know other people were making this. My friends and we've been making it for 10 years or so, but I didn't know people outside of New England were even thinking about it. So
you do have the internet there, right?
We do, yes. Yes. It just came. It's dial up. It's great.
You have mail. I'm sounding old. I realize. So now those other 2 episodes, we didn't really have any expertise on the raw material that we were working with. So mm-hmm. I thought part of our conversation that I thought would be fun today would be to get into the kind of nuts and bolts of maple sap and maple syrup, and just get into the weeds and talk about where the stuff comes from and how it's made and different times of year affecting all that stuff.
Yes.
So you start. Go ahead, Ryan, and give us the basics.
Okay. So maple, the sap it's from, as far as I understand, the starches that the tree is storing through the winter. And it can be found in sugar maples, red maples, and black maples. I don't believe it's in striped or Japanese or some of the other maples you'll see around. So it has to be one of those 3. We have a lot of sugar maples in Vermont, so that's why we produce a lot of maple syrup. So it's stored, and then when the springtime's coming, around this time it should be happening. It's been a little cold lately, but you'll get 35, 40, 45 degree days, and then really cold nights. And that creates a pressure within the tree that when you've tapped it, releases that sap. So, the image people have of like farmers or sap makers is that they're out in their sugar bush and they're tapping into the tree and they're putting the bucket on the tree, and then they have their cart with their horses and or their sleds, and they're going from tree to tree. What the reality is now is that most systems in Vermont, especially the big ones, they've got taps in trees, and then they run like vinyl tubing from tree to tree, which then goes into a pump, which will actually a vacuum pump, which will pull that into the sugar house, and then they will have an RO, one of those RO systems that a lot of people use for their water, and that will actually reduce a lot of the water coming out of that sap even before it gets into the house to be started to be made into the syrup. Oh. And that's become the really efficient way to do this. It helps a lot on your mapling days, the days you're making the syrup, because your gravity is going to be higher going into the whole process. So when I've used the sap, or when I know other people have used the sap, they're getting it from the RO system, which helps a lot in a higher gravity. I know you mentioned in your previous episodes that the gravity was really low of the sap.
Right. We were using Arkansas sap from Arkansas maple trees. And the gravity, I think we took a refractometer reading, and it was like 2 bricks, which is around 1.008 specific gravity, which is a lot lower than I thought it would be.
Yeah, and with an RO system, it can get up to like 1018 or
Hmm.
so. Um, yeah, so you're starting off with a pretty good amount of sugar going into the whole system.
Now,
Um,
does that gravity does that change in different times a year?
it does, and it changes by the trees from year to year. It's a, you know, we have a maple research center at our university because it's Vermont, and we have that. Uh, and they've got test plots in their area that they do testing, and they've got all this data that shows, you know, some years trees will produce an amazing amount of sap, and it's going to be high sugar, and it's perfect. And then the next year they've got nothing,
Hmm.
or you know, even within trees next to each other, you're going to get one that's going to be producing really fantastic sap as far as sugar content goes, and then the one next to it's not doing anything that year. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, it's something that they know a lot about, as far as I understand, um, but it's also one of those it's up to chance. And then you know, I've had a really cold winter. We a lot of places now should be getting into making syrup, but I mean it's 27, 28 degrees at my house today, so it's too cold for that pressure to be building.
Hmm.
So um, you know, and it's there's this fine line. If it gets up to 55, 60, 65, the trees start putting buds out, and then you've lost it, you know. Um, so if we can get a 2 to 4 week season, we can get, you know, the syrup that we need. But um,
And obviously you're not hurting the trees, but you're not bleeding them dry and
no,
killing the trees, or else you
no,
wouldn't have any syrup next year.
yeah, it's something where, um, you know, if you're going out and trying to create a sugar bush, it's important to know the physiology of the trees and understand, you know, what the diameters that are that you should be tapping. What a tree looks like it's sick, and you might actually be damaging it by taking its sap. Um, but no, I mean this has been happening for hundreds of years in the area. I mean, the indigenous people here were doing it, and we're doing it, and our trees are still here. So if you're doing it right, it's fine.
It is truly sustainable.
Yes, yes. As long as we don't start getting 70-degree marches, we're going to be okay.
Mm. Oh, and I have to say that that the term sugar bush sounds like a 1970s Southern rock and roll band. I can't
Yes,
I can't get that out of my head.
it's actually it's the name of our largest or one of our largest ski areas too. So uh,
Um, okay, the gravity of the sap coming out depends on time and all kinds of different variables.
yep,
I guess there are good years and bad years as far
yes,
as sugaring is concerned.
yes, yeah, and you know there's a lot of people who've been doing it for a very long time, and so they know the cycles and they know when they should be out, what days they should be out. Um, I think it's something it could be difficult to get into if you don't have that knowledge. You know, if your family didn't do it or local people in your area aren't doing it, it can be a little overwhelming on knowing when to go out and knowing if you're hitting it at the right time or if it's on, you know, the end of the season or if you're too early. So
You really have to live with the trees, and
you do, and I think we're a pretty rural state, so most people do live with the trees.
there are worse things.
Yes, yeah, it's great. I love it.
So in the olden days, in the sugar shack or sugar
Yep,
shed,
sugar house.
sugar house, they would use wood fire, I would
Yep.
imagine, to boil the water essentially out of the sap and to concentrate it down. Is that what's still done today?
It's all over the board. I know there's some people natural gas because it's relatively inexpensive. A lot of new systems are doing that. There's still some on oil, and then wood. You know, so many of the people who are living in the area where mapling is done also have other trees, so they have that resource available to them. It's a long process, so you do go through a lot of wood, which I think is one of the reasons people like the idea of natural gas better. Um, it's a lot less wood from the area.
Now, does that change the character of the syrup?
Not as far as I know. I mean, I think you're keeping the temperatures the same. I don't know if it adds maybe a smokiness. I don't think it does though.
Surely you would have heard about it if it did.
Yeah, I feel like I mean we have smoked maple syrup, which is a different thing,
Mm.
and that is smoked with local woods. But no, I don't know if I don't believe it makes a difference.
And there are certain reactions that happen in the sugar as it's boiling.
Yeah, I mean I think the big one is that Maillard reaction, and I mean we're talking when you get that sap, you're bringing it in and reducing it a little bit with the RO system, but you're still going from 40 gallons, 35 gallons of sap to every 1 gallon of syrup.
Mm.
And, that's a long time for that to be on heat. You're going to get some caramelization. You're going to get some of those Maillard reactions happening. And that's part of what makes maple maple. If you were to take just plain sugar water and do the same thing, you would end up with caramel.
Mm.
And so it's kind of that. You're ending up with some of that caramelization, but with the added flavor of the maple trees.
That's a good point. I was going to ask how much of that maple flavor is from the trees and how much of it is from just the process itself. But caramel doesn't taste like maple. I mean,
No.
It doesn't taste like a really concentrated maple, which it would if the process was the source of the flavor.
Yeah, yeah. We actually have. We're looking into, as a kind of a state in our agricultural economy, is looking into the idea of making birch syrup. So using birch trees, and that provides you with just a totally different flavor. It's unlike maple in many, many ways. And that one is 50 to 1,
Oh.
from the sap. So you get a lot less, but you also, if the people who are selling it are getting a lot more on the market for it.
Now, when we brewed the beer, the maple beer with Jen and Casey, we flavored or added 2 pounds of grade B maple syrup
Yep.
into the kettle. Now, is grade B worse than grade A?
It is not. I think that's an easy misconception to have. What happens is that throughout the season, you'll end up with, the stuff at the beginning of the season tends to be lighter. And that was what used to be called grade A or fancy. And then as the season goes on, you start getting into the darker grade A's and grade B, and then into grade C, which is just used to be, it wasn't for retail sale. It was only for kind of commercial baking, particularly. And actually, as a state, they recently passed legislation to get us aligned with Quebec, which is the largest producer of maple syrup in the world. And that creates, everything is considered grade A. And then you have grade A golden, which is what used to be fancy. And then they say with delicate taste, which means very little maple flavor.
Kind of like certain light Pilsner beers.
Yes. I mean, I think for many Vermonters, that's what we consider. Yeah, it's our macro for sure. Although
that's the maple syrup you don't fuss over.
Yes, yeah, you get a little bit less of that too, it can be a little bit more expensive. And then that goes into what's going to be called amber color with rich taste, and then dark with robust. And those are going to be what used to be grade A. And then the darker end of that dark with robust and going into what they're now calling very dark with strong taste, that's grade B and grade C. So this allows the producers to start to sell some of that grade C on the retail market, which is really great for people who are looking for that strong maple flavor.
Yeah, I'm sure if you're making candy or baking with it, I would think that you'd want the darker stuff.
Yeah, because a lot of that aroma volatilizes, and so you want to keep as much in the product as possible.
Well, I can see where that would cause some initial confusion.
Yep.
The changing over, but eventually, I guess it would be more clear because when I saw the the name grade B maple syrup, I thought, oh, well, this is probably less expensive. It's inferior in some way. And therefore, we could put a bunch of it in the brew pot. So
Yep.
that clears that up.
Well, actually, it's funny you say that though, because grade B is what you want to use. It's got that maple flavor. It's got that kind of earthy woodiness that you sometimes get from maple. It's coming from grade B.
And they make, as we said a couple times on that 2009 show, they make great maple scotchies.
Yes.
Once Casey and Jen had cut us off from the first runnings of the wort, because Andy and I kept making hot scotchies with the first runnings, we started digging into the grade B maple syrup and mixing a little cheap scotch with that. And I put mine in the microwave for a few seconds, and that just to warm it up. And boy, that was good.
Yep.
But now I'm thinking about that, and I'm also drinking. I went down to the fridge and I got a sample of Andrew Parr's maple wine. So I may be, my questions may make less sense over time, but I'm taking a sip of the Red Star Cote de Blanc sample, which was one of our favorites, Steve and my favorite from that tasting. And boy, it's still tasty. It still tastes really good. It's changed over time, even though I've kept it in the fridge downstairs. It's a teeny bit oxidized, and it's lost a bit of that fresh maple syrup character, but it's still really good. The sweetness is balanced by the alcohol, and really tasty. So anyway, so if I get distracted, that's why.
Okay.
So are we ready? Is there anything else that we need to cover in the kind of technical part of the? So, one question: how is maple syrup similar or different from Belgian candy syrup?
Yeah. So maple is, when it's actually turned into the syrup, is about 95, 96, somewhere in that range, percent sucrose. And some of that is inverted sugars as well, and then trace minerals and that kind of thing. And so it is, chemically speaking, very similar to, if not the same as, candy sugar. And can be used, if used at the right time in the process, in a double or a triple or a quad, to give you some of those, the maple flavor with that, big Belgian character you get from those Trappists. So it's actually, when I was thinking about this before, and coming down with the styles I've had maple in and styles I know maple is really good with, the first thing I said was, we've got a maple triple in the state, which is just phenomenal. And instead of candy sugar, they use maple syrup.
And I imagine that would be, for a triple, you'd want the lighter color.
I think that they probably use grade A, which is going to be, somewhere in that. It's not fancy, but it's not grade B. But I may be wrong. They may have used grade B and just added it at a different time.
Sure.
So
let's talk about your process of making maple wine, which is sort of the mead of the maple world. Yeah.
It's something that we started in college because we had maple syrup and we had water, so we mixed them, and it was horrendous. I mean, it's one of those things where, there's very little nitrogen. The free access nitrogen, the fan is not available in maple. It's like honey in that way. So you will get, in that second, third, even fourth night of fermentation, just an awful sulfur smell if you're not adding yeast nutrients. And that was something, actually, I know your previous guest mentioned. And it's totally true that once we started getting into winemaking and mead making more, we started understanding a bit of that staggered yeast nutrients. And it helps immensely in getting your product fermented. It helps with that flavor. It's a really rich flavor when it's done, and it can be masked a bit if the bad fermentation can be masked a bit by the richness of that maple. Uh, but there is a big difference between a good fermented maple wine and a badly fermented one. So, um, and I think it's important too to add. I do an acid blend. There was one of those powdered acid blends, and I do add a little bit of tannin as well,
Hmm.
right up front. Not entirely sure how necessary it is, but it's one of those habits I've had, bringing it over from winemaking. Um, and using grade B, I think, is important, and using good actual maple syrup is important.
Yeah, you don't want the high fructose corn syrup maple flavored
No,
stuff.
and Vermont made, the MAID is not maple syrup. I can say that. Yeah, so it's using real maple syrup at the regular ratios, I think, of mead making. So like a semi-sweet maple wine, somewhere in between 2.5 to 3 gallons, or 2.5 to 1 ratio.
Hmm.
So for every 1 gallon of syrup, you're using 2.5 to 3 of water.
And what starting gravities are we talking about?
Anywhere from like 1090 up to 1110,
Hmm.
in that range. Yeah, so you're looking between 12 and 15% alcohol, depending on the yeast you're using.
Right.
And the final gravities will, I mean, it's sugar. The yeast are going to go crazy until they kill themselves. So, I get 995, 996 is completely normal. And in fact, if I end up anything much higher than that, I will sometimes pitch a neutral champagne yeast or something to bring it down.
Huh. So that sounds really dry.
Yeah, I tend to like my wines and my beers dry, but I think it's really easy with adding maple into beer or into wine and getting it too sweet.
Hmm.
It can be really cloying. And when I talk about bad fermentations, like that's my first thought is the ones that come out and they taste just like you're drinking maple syrup.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine for like a small shot glass worth, but anything
Right.
more than that, it's too much.
Yeah, in listening to the show from this past year, Steve and I differed on the SO4 sample because I thought it was just too syrupy sweet. And Steve said, like you said, in a very small quantity, in the right setting, it would be, it would be appropriate. But it's not something that you'd want, anything more than, say, an ounce
No,
of.
no, and not between the months of May and October.
Yeah, sitting out on the front porch when it's 90 degrees outside.
Yeah,
Let
just
me
mow the lawn.
Let me just chug some syrup. That's refreshing. Put a lemon on the side of the glass. Now we thought we liked we didn't like the champagne yeast because it was too hot, and on the sample that we had, we didn't prefer the 71B, the Lalvin 71B, because we thought that was a bit hot compared to the others. But that's what you prefer, that yeast strain.
Yeah, when I make meads, that's the one I use, and it translates for me. I've had really good luck with it with maple. I think some other people use the D47 as well. I think it can get hot quick, and I think with meads as well, it's you got to watch that fermentation temperature, and I think you also have to make sure you're not if you're storing it for a while, that you're being steady with the temperatures, which can be really tough if you're not using a designated fridge or something for it, because I do think it in my experience, it will ferment really quickly and then slowly eat away over time. Because I'll age them for a year, 6 months to a year at least before I even try them. And in that time, it'll drop, you know, sometimes it'll go in at 10.5 or 10.4, then drop to 9.96 by the end. Um, and I think if it's fluctuating, that really affects the yeast.
Yeah, I should have brought up the sample of the 71B to taste as well.
Yeah.
Because chances are the kind of heat might have mellowed over time.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what the time frame that Andrew had, from pitching to when we tasted it. So that's not to say that the 71B is bad. It's just that on that day we preferred it less than the others. Most of the others in that range. So what is the sweet spot on temperature wise in your opinion?
I'm a big fan of 68, 67, 68.
Which would be around 20 Celsius.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking at in that range. So it's, much higher than that, especially with the 71B. You get a little bit of phenols, and it does, I guess, a little hot. I mean, it dries it out a lot, as I said, and can go up to about like 13-14%, as far as I know. And I find 68 is a steady fermentation, a week and a half, and then you're done with the primary part of it. You transfer it over, and then you let it sit, and then it'll kind of chews away for a while. But it's it's what I always push for. It's, I don't have a designated fermentation setup, so it's whatever the temperature of the house is.
Mm-hmm.
So, right now, actually, if we can get some syrup, right now would be good. I mean, the beautiful part of the syrup is that you could buy it at some point and save it until later. So I would probably do these more in the, with not having that designated fermentation, doing it more in the fall or the winter, where you can kind of naturally keep that temperature low.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier to warm a space up than cool it down.
Yeah, exactly. Except we had, negative 28 degrees at my house. And there's no warming that.
We didn't have that.
Yeah.
So what other yeast strains have you played with that are fun that play with that maple flavor?
We've used one. I think it's Red Star. I'm not sure which one. And that turned out fine. And then some of the British ale yeasts, which is coming from using maple and brewing, I thought, we'll see what happens here as a wine. And because they don't attenuate completely, a lot of those, they leave a lot of that maple behind.
Mm-hmm.
But I found it can be tough to balance them a bit. You will end up with a sweeter wine.
Mm-hmm.
Off the top of my head, I think of like the Irish yeast, like an Irish ale yeast, or Nottingham, or something like that. If you're looking for a lower alcohol maple wine, one of those I think would do well. And then Belgian wine or Belgian yeasts are really good for this. If you can keep them in the range where they're not expressing bananas or black pepper really strongly. A Hefeweizen yeast would not be good for this, but using the French Saison yeast, I think would be really good. I think you could get some play there with the flavors that would be really good.
Yeah, we also like the sample of the T58 strain as well. The Red Star Côte de Blanc and the T58 were our favorites.
Yeah. I think I don't believe the Red Star I used was the Côte de Blanc because I do think it dries out quick. But I've never had. You're really fortunate that you've got these different samples sitting right in front of you because you've probably had more experience, at least in just those samples, comparing them than we have trying to do it on a regular basis.
But again, it was one batch at a certain gravity, fermented by a certain brewer at a certain temperature, and even repeating that experiment, even if Andrew went back and did it again with a batch of different syrup or Hey, have I been saying syrup or syrup?
Yeah, we'll forgive you either.
SYRUP is one of those words that that's a tell, as they say in
Yes.
poker. But anyway, a different batch of stuff, raw material might make a difference. Year by year, and I guess if different trees are given different levels of sugar in different years, or even different times of year, you could argue that maple syrup can have like a terroir kind of a thing going on, or a vintage. You could have different vintages of maple syrup.
Yeah, we actually our largest producer does sell a maple vintage, and our university put out the flavors of maple, and it looks just like a flavor chart for malts that you see for some malts, and it has things like orange, which is such an odd, like I never thought you could get an orange flavor, but then especially those lighter ones, you can sometimes get a little citrus. How earthy is it? How focused on sweetness is it? Is it just overly sweet, or is it like a subtle sweetness? It is different. And then different producers will produce a little bit different products.
Yeah, I would imagine it's kind of like, we who drink a lot of beer, it offends us when someone says, "Oh, this just tastes like beer."
Yeah.
And I'm sure that the maple people who know this stuff really well, to me, if I taste maple, it tastes like maple, and I haven't really thought about what that is. What is maple, and what are the flavor components that go into that? But I'm sure that if you live with it every day, you develop a taste for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, it's still kind of new for us too. It's not something. Most conversations are still, this is maple syrup, it tastes like maple. But there is a little bit of that background conversation of, oh, well, I'm getting a little of this and I'm getting a little of that. Which reminds me of even 10 years ago in the beer market.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, I'm getting a little of this, I'm getting a little of that.
Sure. Now let's move into beer.
Yes.
Or have you blended, say, maple and honey, or maple and cider, or blended some of those things together?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. We make cider every year. We have a lot of apple trees, and we do put maple in that. We'll do a bit of maple and a bit of brown sugar usually, or a little bit of honey and a little brown sugar, and it works really, really well with apples. I'm not sure. I have not tried it with mead. Doing the honey wine with maple. I'm not entirely sure how the two flavors would meld. I feel like that might be too much, but with cider it works great. And then obviously with beer, as you mentioned, it can be really perfect for that.
Yeah. So what styles are we talking about here? We talked about Belgians. Those, I mean, like a triple or a double, or even a quad with some rich maple flavors blended in there. That sounds really tasty.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's three main things I think about. One is is it malty? Is the style of that beer going to be malty? Because that helps bring out some of that maple. So like brown ales, porters, stouts, particularly breakfast stouts. There's a maple breakfast stout in Vermont right now, it's just phenomenal. Because coffee and maple go really well together. But then you've got kind of triples and doubles and some of the Belgian styles. And then even Oktoberfests or Munich Darks, Box, that kind of thing. For the German styles, those are malty beers. Maple would go well with those. And I think of Scottish ales too. When I think of maple, Scottish ales kind of what comes to mind.
And I think at one homebrew, maybe last year at the Homebrew Club or the Homebrew Conference, the National Homebrewers Conference, it seems like somebody blended a maple beer with a bacon beer.
Yeah.
There, at the taps, and that was pretty tasty.
Yeah, and I think when you're brewing with maple, thinking about what it is about maple and that experience that you want to get from that syrup. Thinking about why you're adding it is important. And for most people, I think it's breakfast is what they think of.
Mm-hmm.
So the coffee goes really well with, I mean, it makes sense it would go well with that bacon, but using malts that are going to be kind of, I'm thinking as like a base malt, using some of the British stuff, to give you sort of a like, a waffly type
Mm-hmm.
flavor.
Yeah,
Um,
biscuity or
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that's important. That when you're building a recipe, build it with maple in mind and think about what's going to work along the way.
So how do you handle the maple syrup in the brewing process? You said that those mapley flavors are kind of volatile.
Yep.
How do you preserve those?
So again, it's if you're looking for a mapley flavor, the later in the boil or after the boil is when you want to do it. So if you add it at the beginning, it'll drive those off, and you end up with a earthy woodiness, which can be good. I mean, if that's what you're looking for. Um, when you add it after the boil into primary, you can get some maple, but you'll still get a little bit more of that earthiness. Um, I would recommend doing it in secondary.
Hmm.
So actually putting it into your vessel, your secondary vessel, and then racking it on top of it. And sometimes even creating a thinner syrup with adding some water to it so it blends well, is really helpful. Um, and then a lot of people, what they do is they'll use it as their priming sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of using corn sugar, they're using maple, and it's trapping everything in that bottle. Um, I think they say anywhere between a half and two-thirds a cup. But I would confirm that online before,
Yeah.
before doing it. I don't want to be responsible for broken bottles in
Yeah.
people's
Yeah.
houses.
Maple bombs are no more fun than
Yes.
regular bottle bombs. So do you have to worry about any sanitization issues in adding maple syrup to the secondary?
No, so I would use, I'm saying fresh, but what I mean is stuff that's unopened.
Mm.
Because once you open the syrup, it'll develop over time, it'll develop a layer of mold,
Oh.
which you just scrape off and throw away and continue on your business. Um, but I wouldn't want, I think that there's potential for some contamination there. Um, so I would, yeah, open it, dip it in your star sand, and pour it right into the secondary, and you should be okay.
So the does honey mold, or does
Now,
honey is honey that much more thick or more dense than maple syrup?
there's a lot of chemical stuff going on with the honey, but yeah, it's the only one that doesn't go bad. If you've got honey um, at the right gravity, and bee makers will use a brick scale, um, totally off of what we use in homebrewing, but
Hmm.
to check on the level. And it's the same actually. Most of the sugar makers I know have their own refractometers, um, which are just, we're looking at 95% sugar. It's I wouldn't want a beer with that much in it.
So that's it's this has all got me hungry and hungry for breakfast and thirsty for beer.
Good, good.
It's a good thing it's Sunday evening. So
Yes.
So is there anything that we have missed that we who are so far away from Maple Country should know?
I would think so. When developing a recipe, maple is going to dry it out. It's sugar. It's just going to do like if you added any other kind of sucrose to the beer. So mashing high, 156, 57, 58 in that range, to help build some of that body. Adding in things like Munich or Vienna, to add a little bit different fermentable character. Crystal 40 to 60 can help a bit. And then adding oats and wheat,
Hmm.
or that's really good because it dries it out. So having a little bit there to add body that's not going to ferment is important.
And for a 5-gallon or a 19-liter batch, we added in that brew day with Jen and Casey, we added a couple of pounds of that grade B maple syrup.
Yeah.
Is that about the amount that you would add?
It's interesting because I before this was looking into what other people were doing, and kept seeing that pounds as if it were honey.
Mm.
I've only understood it as uh, the liquid volume, so a gallon or a half gallon. And I would recommend, if you can, 1 gallon of syrup per 5 gallons of wort.
Wow.
So, right now a gallon of syrup is what, 55, $60. Yeah, so it's even here it's expensive. But if you've got a beer and you're looking for big maple, that's kind of the way to go. And the ones I've done, I do about a half gallon of syrup. So I guess 2 pounds is what that would be, ish, and maybe more. So 64 ounces, so actually 4 pounds. But yeah, a half gallon, and it comes out great.
And we found that in the maple sap brew day where we used the maple sap right out of the bucket
Yep.
with that low sugar level that we had, we didn't get much maple character even from the sap. Even we
Yeah.
tasted the sap right out of the bucket and it was like, well, I guess it tasted a little sweet.
Was it earthy?
Well, there was stuff floating in it, but
Yeah. Well, that's normal.
wood stuff mostly. Yep. I don't know. I can't. It's been a lot. That was 2009. So
Yeah.
But I don't remember it having a whole lot of character. It was just a tiny bit. It was like water, only just a tiny bit sweet.
Yep.
But so just brewing. I don't know if brewing with maple sap is worth anything other than just the novelty of saying that you did it.
Yeah. Yeah. We have probably 6 commercial examples in Vermont where they do use the sap. We have a bit more of a tradition with it. A couple of years ago, our public radio did a series on it. They talked about how a lot of farmers used to make beers with it because it had that extra sugar.
Mm.
It could help make a beer a little bit stronger. And then they would age it through the winter, the rest of the winter, spring, and then in the summertime have it, after working in the fields. And so because of that, I think a lot more people are interested in it here. It does seem to add, again, I keep going to earthy or woody or tree-like flavors to a beer. Somewhat similar, I would say, to like a Fuggle or East Kent Goldings, some of those British hops,
Mm-hmm.
Which actually, speaking of, go really well with maple beers.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about, if you're building, depending on what you're actually building for a maple beer, Willamette would be really good. Mount Hood, Northern Brewer. Nothing that's like over top citrus. None of these, not Citra, not Amarillo, nothing from New Zealand. I think that those tend to need their own place and would clash a bit with maple.
So more piney than fruity.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about, I've never done Simcoe, and I wonder how Simcoe would go. Cascade works well if it's not a Sierra Nevada clone with maple added. So I think if you use subdued Simcoe, as your bitterness, or even 30 minutes into the boil, it might work well. It might be awful. I don't know.
Sounds like a small batch experiment.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Well, Ryan, this has been a lot of fun. And
yeah, it's been great.
It's inspirational. I have to look around at the higher end grocery stores to make sure get the good stuff.
Yeah,
but it would be fun to play with maple syrup again.
Yeah, I recommend it. It's that time of the year to be thinking of it.
There you go. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
thanks again to Ryan. And I think I'll look for some good maple syrup. Syrup. We should have a poll on the website. Who says syrup and who says syrup? Anyway, I think I'll look for some good maple syrup to brew with. I saw some fresh local honey in the grocery store the other day, and I almost picked up some of that. So maybe there's an experiment out there. If cider works well with maple syrup, I'm sure that there's a way that you could do. And I think they're called Acer Glens. I think the maple meads might be called Acer Glens, or they might not. Anyway, if I do an experiment with it, I will let you know, so stay tuned. In the meantime, if you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kids. You can find them all on our site, and you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com, and if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are The Bread Baker's Apprentice, Mastering the Art of Extraordinary Bread, and Watt's Premier RO Pure Reverse Osmosis System, 4-stage reverse osmosis system. There you go. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. Don't forget you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.